The Epstein Files investigation took another dramatic turn on Monday when the former girlfriend and confidant of the deceased child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein refused to answer questions before U.S. members of Congress. Ghislaine Maxwell invoked her Fifth Amendment rights to remain silent when appearing virtually for a closed-door interview with lawmakers from her prison camp in Texas. She's serving a 20-year prison sentence for conspiring with Epstein to abuse minors. However, her attorney did make a dramatic offer. We have more from CGTN correspondent Tony Waterman.
She pled the Fifth. She remained silent. This was expected. What was somewhat extraordinary here was a request that was made by her lawyer in a social media post saying that Maxwell will speak honestly if she is granted clemency by the president, adding that both presidents, Trump and Clinton, are innocent and only she can explain why. Of course, Maxwell is and was the closest person to Jeffrey Epstein. She was his longtime girlfriend, and she has been convicted and is serving this 20-year sentence for sex trafficking minors. But members of the Oversight Committee, which are overseeing this probe, saying that they were disappointed that she decided not to speak today.
We had many questions to ask about the crimes she and Epstein committed, as well as questions about potential co-conspirators. We sincerely want to get to the truth of the American people and justice for the survivors.
And for more now, let's bring in our panel. Joining me here in the studio is Douglas Sloan. He is principal at the National Capital Strategy Group and a former first vice president of the DC NAACP. With us, too, from Miami is political analyst Jadan Horyn. Also joining the discussion is Joel Rubin. He is a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs. And with us is John Fishwick Jr. He is a trial lawyer and a former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Virginia. Welcome all of you to the show. And John, why don't I start with this social media post from the attorney of Maxwell, basically saying, you know, if she gets clemency, she'll give you the testimony. What do you make of this?
Well, her lawyers are trying to leverage the fact that she has a lot of information and she wants out of prison. And so she wants President Trump to either pardon her, which means forgive all of her crimes and wipe the slate clean, or at least commute her sentence where the president could say, okay, you served some time, I'm going to let you out of prison today. She wants out of prison. I think without that guarantee, she's not going to testify. And so she's got that leverage. But I think the Congressional Committee, the Oversight Committee is correct, you know, not to hope that she gets that. I mean, she's already been convicted of trafficking herself, given a hefty sentence. I think the real question would be to folks, even if she did testify today, after having that conviction, you know, how much of her testimony would be believed, even with that sort of grant of clemency. So I think it's kind of a standoff now. I don't think the president should pardon her or commute her sentence. I think if they want to get other evidence about what happened with Epstein, they're going to have to go to other folks. But I don't think they should bend over backwards to permit her to testify.
And just to follow up on that, John, the victims have also kind of echoed what you said, that she's not very trustworthy.
Right. I mean, she's been convicted by a jury in the Southern District of New York of heinous crimes. So if she comes out and says so-and-so did this or so-and-so did that or didn't do this, I'm not sure she'd be believed. And so why give that person a pardon or commute their sentence? They've been found guilty. Justice was done, presumably, in that case. Her appeals have run the course. So I think in that setting, if I was a prosecutor, you know, I certainly wouldn't want to grant somebody in that situation a pardon or commutation. If they didn't want to testify, then that's their decision.
And Jadan, Trump has not ruled out the possibility of a pardon or commutation. What should he do you think?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, both from legal and kind of a pure politics perspective. The lumping in of the Clintons there, and obviously, you know, they had previously refused to testify, and now they have agreed to testify, is obviously a gambit on the part of the attorney for Maxwell to hope that somehow there's a combined pressure of Trumpian self-interest and Clintonian kind of triangulation to perhaps pressure the president to do this. But not only is there a credibility issue, but also there is, you know, the fact that when we're examining what's going on with Maxwell, it is far less to do about American politics per se and American political actors, and far more about major elite financiers and tech CEOs and foreign politicians that seem to be caught up in this scandal. And really, the question becomes for the president less about protecting himself in self-interest and more, does she actually have information that will lead to the arrest and conviction of additional individuals that so far have escaped justice? We know that Deputy AG Todd Blanche said that no additional people would be charged, or there is insufficient evidence to do additional charging. But obviously, there's an enormous amount of victims. There are unstated victims. There are protected victims, and if we can get additional testimony that results in additional convictions, perhaps it would be worth it on the part of the president, less about himself and more about seeking justice.
Joel, Trump says it's time to simply move on from the Epstein story. Let's listen to what he had to say, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
I think it's really time for the country to get onto something else. Really. Now that nothing came out about me, other than it was a conspiracy against me, literally, by Epstein and other people. But I think it's time now for the country to maybe get onto something else.
But what would you say to people who feel like they haven't gotten
healthcare,
justice, Mr. President?
something that people care about.
Healthcare or something that people care about? Your thoughts?
Well, Mike, first of all, I think Donald Trump's name showed up more than any other single individual's name in these files. Maybe rivaled by Steve Bannon, his longtime advisor. But, look, the going to the Ghislaine Maxwell issue as well, it ties into this. In many ways, she's sort of the shiny object that people are focusing on when we don't really need to, per our earlier discussion. She's not reliable. We don't know what she's going to say and how it's going to even impact any investigations. But there's an easy way to understand what took place, which is to get all the files released, to have the redactions actually not cover up names of powerful people, and to allow for prosecutions to go forward. And I think that the country is very interested in understanding what took place and why these files continue to be hidden, and they are not tired of it. And so President Trump, he's making an argument, making a pitch. It's just not being bought by the American people.
And Doug, lawmakers also can go to the Department of Justice and read the unredacted documents when there's so much redactions. That came out recently as well. This story isn't going away, is it?
No, it's not. Like a couple of the speakers before me said, this really is a far wide-reaching scandal with so many different people involved, powerful people, the Clintons, Prince Albert, obviously Donald Trump. And we want to know how and why this was able to go on for so long. We have a span of decades of young girls that were sexually assaulted on this island, and they said they were recruited at Mar-a-Lago, and you have victims who said their statements to police have not been released yet. So, and it's not under the redaction. So there's still hundreds of files that have not been released. They have all these redactions, and people just really want to get to the bottom of this because this is an incredibly serious issue of young girls over the past 20 and 30 years that were sexually trafficked in America. People can't believe that this happened in the United States. They think when they think sexually trafficked, sex trafficking happens in foreign countries. No, it happens right here, right under your nose, to your daughters. It happens to your wives, it happens to your girlfriends. So America really want to get to the bottom of this. And what's so critical is that rape and sex trafficking is not something that Americans are willing to forget and forgive.
Yeah.
So this is not going away, no matter what Trump says.
And I think you meant to say Prince Andrew.
Prince Andrew, okay, that's Albert.
Former President Clinton brought up, Jadan brought that up. He's going to testify. He's kind of ensnared in this. His wife's also going to give testimony, the former Democratic nominee for president, and of course, the former Secretary of State. This is all going to be scheduled and go on behind closed doors, not something they were looking forward to. This is going to happen next month. What's their jeopardy at this stage? How do you see that playing out?
Well, Clinton this isn't his first rodeo in terms of being interviewed and having to deal with scandal. Clinton has been dealing with scandals for the last 30 years. So I have no doubt that he'll be able to handle himself in this situation in terms of the jeopardy or any threat to his livelihood or his freedom. I can't imagine that he will be under any danger of being arrested for anything that happened, some 30 years ago. I imagine this happened before he was president, because, Clinton is a savvy guy, and I just don't see him falling under that guise, because if you're arresting Clinton, you're definitely arresting Trump. And I don't see Trump being arrested, unfortunately.
The more recent documents that came out, though, did reveal that Maxwell was involved with the Clinton Global Initiative, actually in the planning, that Epstein gave $1 million. I don't know if it came from him or somebody else. It doesn't look great for him, does it?
It doesn't look great for him, but like I said, this isn't his first time dealing with scandal, and I guess you're gonna have to dig a little deeper to see exactly how Maxwell was involved, exactly how Epstein was involved with some of what Clinton was doing, and I don't see that happening. I've been surprised before, but I think Clinton will somehow, some way come out of this. What was his nickname? Slick Willie?
Yeah, Slick Willie.
I think Slick Willie will make it out of this just fine.
Boy, you're bringing that one from back in the day. Right?
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember.
So, John, let me talk to you about this perception that's out there. I think a lot of Americans have it, that there's kind of a two-tier system, that the rich and powerful get a pass, that people will cover for them at the expense of the victims, and that, regular Joes, they're going to end up in the legal system, and it's going to be going much different fashion. What would you say to people like that right now as we look at these documents, and people have not been charged? Jadan brought up co-conspirators. Obviously, it wasn't just Epstein and Maxwell involved in this, and yet there's been no one else charged.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of blame, Mike, to go around for this. Several administrations had the opportunity to look into the Epstein case and to bring charges, not just against him, but against all the folks who were assisting him, aiding him. And then, when you read all these emails of all these rich and powerful folks, certainly alluding to what seems to be very disgusting behavior, and certainly they would have had knowledge of what he was doing with those young girls. So I do think it's very disheartening to Americans to know that a lot of rich and powerful people looks like they're going to escape prosecution. I would just say one follow-up thing, though, to the Clintons' testimony. I wish it would be public. I think America should see it, not have it behind closed doors. But there is real risk to the President Clinton and to Hillary Clinton. Everything they say will be flashback. There's a risk of being charged with perjury or obstructing an investigation. And it does look, as it relates to President Clinton, he had a lot of involvement with Epstein, with Maxwell. And so there are going to be a lot of questions about that. And so he's got to be very careful that he obviously tells the truth and doesn't obstruct the investigation.
Okay, John, I want to ask you a question, because this can be a lot more inside baseball, and you've got that legal mind. I'm reading through these documents, and some of this stuff just seems really weird. They're talking about pizzas and dentists. I mean, is this all code? I mean, what do you read into all of this?
Yeah, you wonder if there was code, that they were talking about certain things about the dinners and about, dental work and about the rooms. And it's very disgusting. It's hard to read it. It's so repulsive. But you do wonder if they had a code. Epstein was such a devious person. He had, ways of communicating, bringing people into his nair. But it's really shocking that so many of these rich and powerful people let him do that. Why they didn't just walk away from this guy, from the jump. It's just hard to imagine. But nonetheless, so you wonder what was happening behind those closed doors. And unfortunately, all of our suspicions that horrible things were happening behind the closed doors. And that's why they permitted themselves to communicate with this guy, to go visit him and to spend time with him. Because most folks' antenna would immediately be raised, and they say, no, I'm not talking to this guy, and not going to be in the same room with this guy.
And John, Congressman Massey and Ro Khanna are really kind of leading the charge on this. They're not going to let it go away. Do you think there'll ever be additional charges?
I think it's going to be very difficult, because, if you could have to have, corroboration about what happened. You can have the victim's testimony, but I don't think they know about all the folks what happened behind the scene. They know about Epstein, but he's dead. They know about Maxwell, and she's been convicted. And so there's a lot of conjecture about these other folks. We're very suspicious about what they did and what they knew. I think the only charges that could probably come out of this, if somebody convenes a grand jury, if DOJ convenes a grand jury and folks go in there and misrepresent what happened, there could be charges for obstruction of justice or for perjury, either to a grand jury or to Congress. but to actually build a trafficking case from something that happened decades ago, I think is going to be very difficult.
And Jadan, John was talking about the Clintons and their testimony. They want it to be held in public. He thinks it's a good idea. What are the Republicans afraid of in terms of televising this? I mean, why not televise the hearing?
I think the Republicans would actually love to televise the hearing, but at the same time, what they understand is that the testimony could implicate high-ranking Republicans, either from the Clinton era or current Republicans that are elected, notwithstanding, President Trump, just talking about other elected officials. And also, while it may be unseemly and, from an electoral perspective, kind of gross to have an association with someone like Jeffrey Epstein. An association itself is not evidence of guilt. And, to create that in the sense of the public is to allow, of course, then, Democrats to try to do the same thing of guilt by association as opposed to with actual evidence. So I think Republicans they're playing it safe here because the danger is, of course, that the Clintons could say something that could implicate them, that could implicate various individuals that they receive funding from, and the collateral damage once released to the public without being either filtered or refocused with questions could result in this scandal just kind of erupting even more. And that I would say is the real fear, right? When we're dealing with, allegations and associations in different individuals who may have had knowledge, all it takes is one person to speak that an additional person does. And, the collateral damage that rolls from that is not something that I think either the president or the party on the Republican side wants to have dominating the headlines as they're going into this election year.
And Joel, collateral damage, guilt by association. Jadan brings up some really good points here, but there's a split screen. This isn't just Americans involved in this. We heard earlier Doug talking about Prince Andrew being involved. There's people in the UK involved, and Keir Starmer's coming under a lot of pressure to step down because the former UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, was an associate of Epstein. And here in the US, you don't hear like, oh, you've got to resign or you've got to step down, whereas in the UK, it's a different response. What do you make of that?
Yeah, no doubt, Mike. It's because we currently don't have accountability. And what we're all talking about here on this panel is, in this sense, a struggle to figure out how to get accountability. There's no mechanism. There's been no special prosecutor assigned, for example. There's been no clarity from the files about what kinds of investigations may need to be pursued. Even this question about the Clintons testifying, which is an accountability measure. Oh, well, now, my ears, I can't believe it. Republicans don't want to humiliate Bill and Hillary Clinton in public. Since when is that the case? And now President Trump is saying nice things about them. Clearly, he's petrified of what they may say. And so there's like this conspiracy of silence all around Washington and in the power centers across the board. And that's why we're not seeing the calls for accountability. And I think the problem is that there are millions of pages in black and white. This is not going away. We may very well be looking at this for years to come. And so accountability, that still is yet to be seen in the United States.
I said not a lot of calls for resignations, but we are hearing some here in Washington. Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Commerce Secretary, is facing some calls to resign. He appears in the files. Again, a spokesperson says he had previous relationships and interactions with Epstein, although some of the stories don't seem to add up. Again, not accused of any kind of wrongdoing, but inconsistencies in his stories. Are Democrats in danger, though, of overplaying their hand by saying he needs to step down, that sort of thing?
I really don't think so because, I just want to point out what the last speaker said. He brought something up that's very important regarding accountability. This case, this scandal, looks like it's going to exceed Trump's presidency. And that's when we're probably going to get most of the answers. Because right now, Trump is stonewalling. He's saying there's more important things that we need to be focused on. Look over here. Look at ICE in Minnesota. He'll bring up any number of things to try and distract us from the Epstein files. But, luckily, we've been able to maintain singular focus on this issue. But we may not really see any true movement. And get down to the real brass tacks of what happened in this horrible, horrible sex trafficking ring until Trump is out of office. So no, I don't think the Democrats are overplaying their hands. The Democrats need to be more aggressive. They need to go balls to the wall in terms of demanding accountability from anyone that's been involved in this, including President Clinton.
And John, there's other news stories out there. I want to touch on one of them, of course, ICE continuing their crackdown. CBS News out with this report. Only 14% of the nearly 400,000 immigrants that have been nabbed in the first year of the Trump administration actually face charges or convictions of violent criminal offenses. And of course, that was the big thing. We're going to go after the bad guys. And this comes from a document from Homeland Security. This is obviously still going to be a legal case, and it's going to course through the legal system quite a bit. But I want to get your feelings on how this is going to shake out in the courts and in the court of public opinion, the ICE raids.
Yeah, so Mike, I think most folks want to see the folks who are in this country illegally, who have criminal records. We want them out of here and out of here quickly. But I think ICE needs to be more targeted, going after those folks, not just going block by block, knocking on doors, but to go after the targeted bad folks and get them out of this country. I think people are comfortable with that. I think people also want to have review of what ICE's actions are. We need independent investigations by the FBI, not just by the Department of Homeland Security. Doesn't mean charges are going to be brought against a particular officer, but I think there needs to be transparency so that the public has confidence in what they're doing. I think right now we've got kind of a standoff where I would say ICE is being too aggressive, but I also think the protesters are being too aggressive by, getting in their face and filming them. There needs to be more protests in the public square like Martin Luther King did. And ICE needs to be more targeted in their raids, going after the really bad folks. Once you get through those, maybe you can go after those other folks. But there are a lot of folks who are criminals who are in this country illegally, and they should be the priority for the deportations.
Doug, we live in interesting times because we could have a whole half hour on that and a whole half hour on this, and we could do another whole half hour on this. So Obama video, the racist tweet that came from the White House, and a lot of question about who posted it. Trump initially seen as maybe he did, and then no, it was a staffer. And then you have Republican Senator Tim Scott saying, this is the most racist thing I've seen out of this White House. What do you make of this?
Yeah, well, I think that, first of all, I think Trump did post it. It came out late at night, 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. What staffers out there using Trump's social media account at that time, number one. Number two, after it came out, the Trump team immediately went on the offensive, saying, no, there's nothing to see here. It was part of a larger video. You're making a much to do about nothing. So they immediately went on the defensive by saying, there's much to do about nothing. So, and then they came back and said, well, we saw it, Trump saw it, but he didn't see the whole thing, and then he didn't think it was a big deal. So I've seen the story changed a number of times here, which tells me that in all likelihood they're lying, and Trump did post this thing, and he knew exactly what he was doing when he was posting it. It is frighteningly racist for him to come out with something like this, to portray the former president and first lady as monkeys, going back to racist tropes that were used during the Jim Crow era. Even Republican senators have come out against this, and there's really no excuse for it. And unfortunately, it's not surprising. Trump has had a record of racism from before his presidency, from when he and his father were sued by DOJ for refusing to rent apartments to black tenants, from when he had a casino and he had to pay a fine for refusing to have black dealers on the tables in his casino when they were dealing with high rollers. If there were high rollers at the table, he would take all the black dealers away and only have white dealers there. So yeah, and then calling for the execution of the Central Park Five, even though they ended up being exonerating before they had due process, before they were allowed their time in court. So he has a history of racism, and it's unfortunately, it's not surprising, and hopefully he can get help.
Jadan, what's your reaction to the tweet itself and the administration's response?
Yeah, I think the reaction is indicative of something interesting, and that is, contrary to what Douglas just said, I think it kind of illustrates that Trump himself whether he posted it or whether someone, at the White House allegedly posted it, he took it down because obviously its connotations are incorrect. But I would just counter that Trump was a Democrat before he ran in 2016. Current Democrats in office obviously had no problem taking his money, posing with him, someone that, supposedly was an avowed and, overt racist. So, let's just frame things for what they are. Obviously, the administration acknowledged that it was a colossal misstep. They took it down, which is a rare thing on the part of this administration. And, they to paint otherwise. Now, my reaction to it is literally absurd. Of all the things that I want our administration to be focusing on, it's not memes talking about Trump being king of the jungle and painting, our other politicians as monkeys or animals. But at the same time, it is pretty par for the course for our public discourse right now, which, is social media memes and internet idiocy.
All right, Joel, one final question. Super Bowl's over. It used to be if you were in a red state, blue state, you could watch the game. But the culture wars have even come to the Super Bowl, the biggest game in the country. Some folks boycotting the halftime show, others watching and embracing Bad Bunny. What do you make of this? And I've got about 45 seconds for you.
Well, me encantó el Super Bowl. Estoy enamorado con Bad Bunny. I could speak in Spanish if you want, but I might get blacklisted by the by the administration for doing that. I loved it. I thought it's horrible just to go to this discussion about the video that was posted. It feeds into the idea that somehow people of color are not equal American citizens. President Trump's team went crazy when Bad Bunny was named as the singer. Why? Because he's Latino and he's Hispanic. He's also an American citizen. I think they forgot about that part. And so to me, the game was great. The music was fantastic. Kid Rock lip synced, got about 300,000 people watching his event, and 140 million people watched Bad Bunny.
Joel,
So I think we know who Americans prefer.
We have run out of time, but it's always good to talk to somebody who spent some time in Costa Rica and knows Spanish to end the show with. Thank you so much to all of our guests, and then we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for watching another edition of The Heat.